My name's Julienne van Loon. I'm an Australian novelist, and it's a pleasure to be invited to speak as part of this program for the Sydney Mechanics School of Arts, the Thomas Keneally Centre and Varuna, the National Writers' House. I've written 3 contemporary Australian novels. My most recent is this one, which is called Harmless. My fiction really responds to contemporary times, so I set my fiction in a contemporary kind of a setting, and I think probably the thing that inspires me to write fiction is questions I have about how we live now. And I think for me, as both a reader and a writer, I think of fiction as a tool for thinking. And so when I sit down to write a book like this one, there are questions that are sort of driving me on. And Harmless is a book that arose out of my living on the kind of urban fringe of Perth. I was interested in that place as a space that contained a lot of tension, new migrants coming in, a lot of change as the city suburbs move out. It's also an area where there are a lot of prisons, and one of my characters is in the prison in the story. But I'm a Buddhist too, and very interested in Buddhist philosophy. And so Harmless responds to an ancient set of stories known as the Jataka tales in the Buddhist canon, and takes some of those tales and recasts them in an Australian context for a new audience. I'm here at Varuna now working on a new work of fiction, and one of the things that's sort of at the front of my mind just at the moment with my manuscript is the whole question of revision. One of the things that the sort of process that I follow with my own writing, it's very much in line with the famous quote from E.L. Doctorow, who said that writing is like driving a car at night in the fog, and that you can only ever see just a small distance in front of the headlights. But you get there in the end, in any case. And so that rings true for me with my process. I tend not to know very much at all about where my story is going. As I say, I have these driving questions, and through that comes character. Place is very, very central to what I do, but also questions around philosophy and ideas really kind of spur my writing on. But I'm often in a state of confusion. As the draft goes on, I try not to think too much about structure. But at the moment here at Varuna, I'm working on a manuscript that has a full draft already. And so now I'm at that stage. Then I start to think about the structure, and I go back to some basic guidelines about story structure, such as the 3 or 5 act structure, and I start to then look at the pieces that I've got and think about them in terms of setting up the early conflict, in terms of driving the conflict forward, in terms of moving towards a climax, and then a kind of a denouement. And I find that very useful to then sort of almost put that structure down on top of the manuscript that I have. So the manuscript is not a slave to that structure, but it just allows me then to be less confused about what it is that I'm trying to do, and more deliberate about what I'm trying to say and why, and what to emphasise and what to de-emphasise. And then I can start to make decisions about what to leave in and what to take out of the plot. Beyond that, in my experience with my other books, and it is a little bit different each time, I can then go back to looking more at the poetics, looking more at the stylistics, and those aspects of language really interest me in fiction as well. I write literary fiction, and so I am interested in the poetics of how fiction works. So that's sort of always there, but as the manuscript will move on, I'll become more interested in those things. But here at the moment, this week at Varuna, it's all about structure for me, and I think the thing that I find in rereading, and I often say to young writers and to new writers where I teach in the university system, that you have to sort of budget for rereading your work. You can't reread it too often. When it's in draft stage, it's always going to be a disappointment because it's not finished, and you can't expect it to be finished too early. And so I sort of say to myself as I sit down to reread again a manuscript, don't expect it to be beautiful yet. It's still a work in progress. And so there's that sort of tentative reading where you're trying to sort of think about the piece of work as something that's still forming, that and you're setting in a way setting aside your judgment of it as in terms of quality, and trying to come to it instead with the question of understanding what is going on here and why and how is it shaping out. And I think that's a useful way to approach that very difficult sort of stage of rereading the manuscript.